Thanks for all the words today. It's been great to hear everybody. It's good to be out here, not in costume this week. I enjoyed the 4 weeks. I really did. That was just a hoot and a holler for me. I had a great time, but I missed you. It's good to be back normal. I've always been grateful I'm not a woman, and I love you ladies, but number one, y'all got to have babies, and so I'm glad I don't do that. And number two, I am eternally grateful that I don't wear makeup, because I'm going to tell you, I don't know how y'all get that off. Is it like paint stripper or what? I mean, I'd be back there and I'm just scrubbing my face and Melissa gives me stuff and it burns and I'm getting it all off and I think it's gone. I get home, wipe my face, it's still there. So I just think it's eternal. But it was a lot of fun, it really was. We're going to get to enjoy our Christmas decorations this week and next week. And then unbelievably, it's time to put them back up again. Goes fast, doesn't it? Got our new sign out front if you haven't noticed. Grace Crossing out there. Grace Crossing Church Christ. You'll be hearing me talk about the crossing a lot because that's an opportunity when you say I'm going to the crossing or I'm going out to Grace Crossing Church. They'll say, well, what's that about? Well, I'll tell you what it's about. It's about finding grace from God. And so that's an exciting thing. We got a lot of good stuff going on. Now, I know you're probably aware of time. Some of you think, man, we're going to be here till 11:30. No, we're not. That's why we heard all these sermons from everybody else, because I'm not going to talk a long time. But I want to share something with you that I think is important. The first settlement in the United States was Jamestown, 1607, Virginia. Any of you been there? It's absolutely a fascinating visit. It's just incredible. The first settlement and what they've excavated. Unfortunately, it was only 12 years later that a Dutch ship came in with 20 Africans that were taken from a Portuguese ship, and they became the first slaves on the continent, 12 years after Jamestown. It would be 250 years of slavery following that, 2.5 centuries of a very rapidly expanding institution of slavery. Now, some would say that the Civil War that came after those 250 years, they'd say, well, that was really about states' rights. Well, all right. It was about states' rights to own slaves. Some would say, well, it was about the economy. Okay. It was about the economy and the ability to grow your economy on the backs of slaves. Some would say, well, it was just a glorious fight for the right of all mankind. That's what I was taught as a kid. It was a fight about slavery and the ability to own people. Abraham Lincoln wasn't really, he was against slavery all of his life. But when the war started, that wasn't his theme. His real theme was to protect the Union, to pull the Union back together. And we're going to have to fight this war in order to protect the Union. But it was very quickly that President Lincoln saw this is going to end up being about slavery. For one, we've got to make sure that the French and those know that this is about slavery so they don't support the South. That would be a disaster for us. Immediately saw we don't have the means to maintain this with troops unless we could bring in those that would be formerly slaves. They saw that the economy of the South was based on slavery and they were never going to pull it together if that wasn't ended. So it was on New Year's Day, 1863, that Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation saying that slaves will be free forever. Now, you probably also know that the war didn't end on January 1st, New Year's Day, 1863. It was going to last a while, but he had already signed a proclamation that said if a Union militia or Union troops go into a city and take it, then they can take those slaves and bring them back to the North. So they were already doing that. So that by the end of the Civil War, there would be 200,000 black troops that had fought for freedom in the Civil War. And so in December of 1865, he signed the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery forever, freedom. But I'm not trying to give you a history lesson. You're going to see where I'm going in a little bit. Well, I am trying to give you a history lesson. They had things immediately following 1865 called the Black Codes. And those codes said that black people, in some instances with very strong regulations, could not own land or lease it. There were black codes that prohibited them from having houses in certain places, being able to buy houses, and some districting that still exists and affects politics very strongly. It was decided that blacks couldn't open certain businesses and they couldn't open them in certain places because that was the black code. The black code determined that black people could not travel county to county and state to state without certain regulations and certain booklets and certain freedoms and certain things they had to show. And then you had the Jim Crow laws, which said things like black people can't swim in a swimming pool with white people. I remember a little boy when I was a kid in Sweetwater, Texas. He was a 10-year-old African-American young man. He climbed a fence of the swimming pool one night, a swimming pool that cost me $0.25 to swim in if I happened to have $0.25. But he couldn't swim there, and he snuck in the middle of the night, and he drowned. That's not been so long ago, folks. The Jim Crow law said a black person couldn't drink from the same water fountain or could not go into a restaurant where white people were eating. And some of you experienced that. Even though they died, the practice didn't necessarily die. And so what I'm leading to, folks, is freedom's not always freedom. It's not always exactly what somebody called it. There was sharecropping that came about, and there were white sharecroppers too, and sharecropping came about as a way to protect those that had lost their slaves, and so slaves could sharecrop a piece of land, but they would have to borrow the money from the person that owned the land at exorbitant interest rates. They'd have to borrow the money to start the farming season, pay it back at the end of the season, so they stayed in poverty forever. There was a thing called, that you may or may not know about, there was a thing called prisoner leasing. So that if there were black prisoners in the local jails and prisons, a farmer could lease them for nothing. And they'd have slave labor. So guess what? If a black young man said hello to a white woman, he could go to jail for 5 years. And now be a slave on somebody's farm, getting away from those laws. Voting often required that you'd have a literacy test. So if you couldn't read and couldn't answer common questions, you couldn't vote. Or there'd be a tax, a poll tax, and you had no money, so therefore voting was taken away. There was discrimination in work where a white man would get paid sometimes 3 and 4 times as much as a black man, and they could not join unions. So here's what I'm saying, folks. Freedom is not always freedom. It doesn't always feel like that in the world. Men have a hard time producing what is real freedom. Sometimes it's fleeting. And now we know that beyond slavery, folks. We also know it because we're supposed to be free from anxiety, right? But how many of us still have anxiety? Boom. We're supposed to be free from doubt, but many of us still doubt. We're supposed to be free from being afraid if we die, we'll go straight to hell. We're supposed to be free from all of those things. We're supposed to be free from strife among ourselves. We're supposed to be free from division. We're supposed to be entirely unified, but sometimes freedom's hard to get, isn't it? Well, I want to share some verses with you. In 2 Corinthians, Paul says this: the Lord is spirit. 2 Corinthians 3. The Lord is spirit. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. The Spirit of the Lord's right here. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's intended to be freedom. John said in John chapter 8, you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. If you don't feel free today, then what you're listening to is not truth. If you feel bound up and tied up and oppressed, then you need to take another look at the truth, because Jesus said the truth sets you free. If you're bound by rules and regulations and constantly paranoid you hadn't done enough, you're not listening to truth, you're listening to yourself. Jesus also said in that same chapter, whom the Lord sets free is free indeed. Who the Lord sets free is free for sure. Paul said, Romans chapter 5, For freedom you've been set free. You weren't free to stick other shackles on. For freedom you've been set free. Don't put a yoke of slavery back on yourself. Don't go from one sense of insecurity to another one. Don't go from miserable to miserable. You've been set free for freedom. In Romans 8, Paul said, there's no condemnation. How much condemnation? Y'all better say better than that. No condemnation. How much condemnation is there? There's no condemnation to those that are in Christ Jesus. For the Spirit of the truth of Jesus Christ sets us free from the law of sin and death. The law of the Spirit sets you free from the law of sin and death. And what's the law of sin and death? You sin, you die. Period. The Spirit sets you free from that. And there's no condemnation. Here's the thing. You can condemn me. God will not. You can judge me. God doesn't. You can tell me I'm not good enough. And I'll tell you that doesn't matter, because He is. You can tell me I'm lost, and God will disagree with you. My mind can tell me that I don't deserve it, but my mind is lying to me because I never did deserve it. He gave it to me. It's a gift. My mind can tell me when I go to bed tonight, I better pray, I better repent of everything I've possibly done wrong, or I'm going to wake up, and if I die during the night, I'll go straight to hell. And my mind is lying to me. For freedom, He set us free. And the truth sets us free. Freedom. Real freedom. Freedom from worry. Freedom from care. Freedom from chaos. Freedom from fear. The ability to go to bed and know God's got this. To be free. To look at all the things that set me back and I worry about and I spend time on, to let them go. And then somebody says, well, if you let it go, you don't really care. That's the devil talking to you. Let it go. God's bigger than you. That's freedom. It's when somebody comes in and I don't have to give them a test of whether or not they're worthy to be here, or whether or not they deserve to pray, or they ought to be allowed to sing, or they ought to be, I got to vet them out before they can speak. That ain't freedom. Freedom is we're going to love people and enjoy people and share God with people, and we're going to let them share God with us. And if they got some growing to do, we'll watch them grow, because that's what we do, and we will love them through the process. My prayer for this church this year is that we will celebrate and experience freedom more than we ever have, and that all those we come in contact will say, what is it about you? And then we get to tell them. I got a little song. It's a beautiful little song, but this is normally our family time. But here's what I want to do. I want you to listen to the song. But if today you're not free, even if you're a Christian but you're not free, you're struggling, I just want you to hold your hand, and I want the people around you, I want you to pay attention. If somebody's hand goes up, go pray for them. Okay? Folks, I am a priest, but so are you. Peter said we're a royal priesthood. I got no prayer magic, okay? I'm happy to pray for everybody. I'm happy to serve anybody. Everybody in this church can do that. So if you're not free, I just want you to hold your hand up. I want a Christian around you to go to you, hold your hand, and pray for what you need to be set free from. If today you're not a Christian and you need to experience the freedom of Jesus, I'm up here. Come get me, okay? Today I'll say John or Daryl or whomever you want to get, go to them and say, I need to be a Christian today. And if you don't see a hand around you, listen to this song, because Home Free does a really beautiful job about it. When you get home, look up the words to this song. I've read them to you before, but look them up and see exactly what they mean.